I'm Ashley.
And I'm Jasmin.
And you're tuned into Ham Radio Stranger Things podcast.
It's a ham radio.
The Cadillac of ham radios.
And welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Ham Radio Stranger Things podcast. On today's episode, we will be continuing our journey into the script for season 4, chapter 7, The Massacre at Hawkins Lab, our script analysis series. And today, part 3, we will be discussing Eleven's journey back to that fateful day in September of 1979, which forever changed not only her life or the lab, but you can make the argument Hawkins and everything that we've experienced thus far. We'll be talking about the Upside Down being stuck in 1983, and of course, we'll be talking about some discrepancies between the script and the on-screen product. Parts 1 and 2 of this series are currently available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So if you want to go ahead and listen to those before you listen to part 3, so you can be all caught up, more than welcome to do that. So before we actually begin our discussion today, our part 3 discussion, Jasmin is going to tell you where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
You can find us on Instagram at ham.radio.media, on Twitter at hamthrough, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media or at Ham Radio 1983. That's our handle. We also have a Discord server that we've started. The link will be in the show notes and description for this episode. If you want us to talk about something in particular, or you have a fan theory you'd like to share, or you have a question, we've taken listener questions in the past, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley has a fanfic about Things college years on AO3, which there will also be a link to in the show notes. And the podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms: Google, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. Please consider leaving us a review and rating. We have a lot of totally too good stuff coming up, so please follow us on our socials to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content.
And thank you, Jasmin. Yeah, so the Discord, we just got that up running about a month ago now, or at least by the time of this recording, and we've had some really good responses. There's some friends of the podcast have jumped on there to share, and especially if you guys like the music in Stranger Things, and you want to talk about that, like that's been a big discussion on the Discord as of late. There's no problem about that. Or if you just want to come on the Discord and you can talk about really whatever. I mean, your family, your friends. But yeah, just come. Even if you are a Byler fan, you can still come and join us on the Discord. All we ask is that you do not spam the Discord with Byler discussion. It's okay if you drop a line every now and again, but don't hit it up all the time. If you do that, we'll probably call Vecna on you, because we can't allow a lot of that. But moving on to the topic hand today, which is, as I just mentioned earlier, the our part 3 of our script breakdown. But before we get into that, Jasmine and I have decided for this series in particular to include an essential question before each breakdown that we do, and it kind of revolves around something in the pages of the script that we will be discussing. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to pose the question at the beginning of the discussion, and then once we get done discussing the pages of the script we have to cover, then we will attempt give our best attempt to answer the essential question, and we'll probably try to put it in the description of the episode so that you guys can send us your thoughts on the EQ as well. So for part 3's essential question, was Dustin's hypothesis regarding the Vecna/Mind Flayer connection correct or incorrect? So hold on to that thought, everyone, and try your best as we go along to think of, what your answers may be. And Jasmin and I will do the same. So wait to the end of the episode today to hear mine and Jasmin's thoughts, on the question. So we begin the script breakdown with 11 is now going back to September 8th, 1979, the day of the massacre at Hawkins Lab. Brenner's finally gotten her to calm down and to do this, and so we're back in time through the Nina tank, and this is after 11 gets bullied and kind of pushed around and knocked unconscious by the older lab kids, and she's in the infirmary. And it's really funny because Dr. Brenner himself, probably not an MD, is examining her and is, just pointing, a little flashlight in her eyes to make sure her eyes are dilated and all that good stuff. And he asks her, any more headaches, nausea this morning? She shakes her head no. Then he asks her about her memory. Can you remember what happened? And she still says no. And then he says, perhaps someone else can fill in the gaps for you or us, yes. And so they walk off into the training room. And then Dr. Brenner, as in the script, as it was on screen, has all the kids lined up, and there's the orderlies there, including the friendly orderly who we don't yet know much about him. He's standing there, and this is when Brenner asks Levin to step forward, and then Brenner's bringing up what happened, and he's like, she claims to have no memory of this, but I know someone in this room, did it, and they're all just, standing there. They don't want to say anything because they're scared, and all of this is like verbatim. All of the dialogue is verbatim in the script as it is in the actual scene itself. But then we get to a part where one of the numbers, who we know as number 2, he is not called number 2 in the script. He is called number 4 in the script. So Jasmin and I are going to talk a little bit about that real quick. Kind of talk about, why we think maybe they changed his name from number 4 to number 2. Jasmin, would you like to begin?
Sure. Yeah, that was something that I noticed too as being one of the biggest changes. Like, you're right that most of the scene is very similar to the script. And I think that has to do with something I noticed when we've been, comparing the script to the final product, is things about the lore or the lab are almost identical. Whereas the biggest changes we see is dialogue in the Hawkins or the Russia plots in terms of interpersonal stuff with the characters, which makes sense because we know that they have like a set plan and a set Bible about the lore, which would include stuff about the lab. So to me, it makes sense that that's going to be verbatim because that has to be particular in order to get to a certain point, whereas everything else can change. It's more chemistry of the actors, or someone has a good idea, or they play it, they're like, well, that doesn't sound very good, let's try it again. It's more natural, that dialogue, versus the lab, which is not natural on purpose. So yeah, I noticed that too, and I'm curious as to what the fact that it was the number of the kid responsible got changed. Yeah, like it's for the script, but 2 in the final product. I don't know if that means anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it means, that there's something to do with the number 4, because as far as you know, both 2 and 4 die in the massacre.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was significant, or I guess like it's significant, but I'm not sure what the significance of it is. Do you know what I mean? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I don't really know. I mean, this is going to sound kind of bad, but it's not like as if it really matters now, because they both lost their lives tragically. But I kind of thought maybe when I first read the script and saw that, I thought, well, maybe they were trying to, connect it as it's the fourth season and they're split like in four different,
Hmm.
corners of the world, so to speak. Um,
Yeah, like
that's what I thought.
thematically.
But
Yeah.
regardless of if he's called two or four, I find it very interesting that, especially considering that he is number two in the show, is how uh, much of an age gap there is between him and number one. Like number one
Mm,
is at least 10 years older than this kid. Like
yeah,
I think
he's got to
this,
be 20 or 30 by that point. Like
yeah,
yeah. Which I didn't notice that, but you're right. The fact that I wonder if that's what they were trying to show us. Like the fact that it took Brenner like a decade or more to take what Henry had and create the program.
yeah,
Like maybe they were trying to show that it took him and his like people like 10 or 15 or 20 years to get to a point where um where there's number two. It also makes me wonder if like this is obviously a massacre, but if there were other kids they tried and experimented on that died, do you know what I mean? There were other numbers before that two became two. Like I don't believe they're only using a number once. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like they probably start over a bunch of times or they
yeah,
replace that kid. And we also don't know the exact timeline of when Terry was there. Like, obviously, she has to be there before Elle becomes 11 because she's kidnapped. But, like, we know he built the program around Henry. Did MK just start, before that? And then they built the program around Henry? Or, like, where they kept trying to perfect what was transferring what Henry had? And MK Ultra was going on at the same time, and they're both part of the same program. Was the fact that there's such an age gap, so that they had, people who are willing participants, like Terry went there voluntarily. You know what I mean? Like, is that part of the
yeah,
transition? Is it, okay, well, it took them 10 years to get to this point? Or like, and also what we understand, like, Terry threw a wrench into their plans. Every other kid they were able to abduct, either their family was, had died or they didn't fight the same way Terry did. Like, they make a real point of that in season one of the thing that really sets Terry and Joyce and Hopper apart is they're willing to fight, they're willing to push for it, they don't care if they look insane. And that was not the case with the other families. Either they didn't push as hard or they were deceased. So I wonder if that's what they're trying to show us that, like, or maybe they're trying to give themselves more leeway with the timeline there. You know what I mean? If that kid is two instead of four, then they're saying, okay, well, there's an age gap here, and maybe that'll play into when we get into the final understanding of what the lore, what that timeline is. But yeah, it makes sense to me that there would be a big gap there because it took. I mean, we see how powerful Vecna is in season four, how powerful he was when he was a child, but the act of transferring that um, that would take a while. So I'm curious if that means we're going to get more about that timeline or more about those intervening years in the final season. What do you think?
I mean, we've got to, you would think, right? Like, there's just so much gaps. There's so many gaps there, and to me, I mean, you're gonna need to fill in those whenever um, have the final season. Not just because it's the final season, that's like your last opportunity, but because Vecna, this guy, and his story is now becoming so big and just so important to the narrative. Like, you can't just, we can't just leave it at just Eleven's, side of things. I feel like we need to see his side of things as well, what happened to him um, during those years prior to this event. Um, because there's no doubt that was a big chunk of his life because Brenner took him when he was probably what, like 12 or 13, and now he's an adult, about 1979. I hope we get some answers on that. And to that, there is an action sequence in this script that comes before this, where we're introduced to number 2, about the orderly. And it says, quote, as Brenner speaks, Elle clocks the friendly orderly standing nearby. Something seems off about him. He averts his gaze from her as Brenner continues to address his quote unquote children, end quote. And yeah, that is definitely what happens on screen. And every time I watch that scene, I mean, he looks like, I mean, his eyes, like the first time I watched it, I was like, I feel like this man is Vecna because I saw his eyes.
Really?
And
Because
he
I
had
didn't
that,
see that in that scene. Even
yeah,
when I
like
rewatched it,
it's
I
quick.
don't,
It's
I,
like 2 seconds and then it jumps back to uh Brenner.
'cause to me that came
Um,
across more as like fear, because we'd seen the scene where um he'd like Brenner had shocked him, right? And so to me it was more like, oh, he's fearful, like he's not doing anything because he's fearful. That's more what it came across to me. But I think that speaks to just what a great actor Jamie Campbell Bower is, that he walks that line so well right up into the reveal, where even if you clock that something was wrong, or clock that he was Vecna early on, it's still a huge twist, even if you clocked part of it, because he's so good when you kind of walk that line where you're like, see, is he not? He really makes you doubt yourself. Yeah, yeah,
it's
so
very
good.
compelling. It really is because, knowing what we know now, whenever I do rewatches, I always I always say, I mean, he's about to go off. Like I just, knowing now, like he's about to go off. And it does make me wonder still why, um, why he killed all those children. I mean, knowing what he wanted to do, like you could have used them. They all have powers, just like you. Um, and
Yeah, it's weird that like he wants Elle to join him, but he kills everybody else. He's kind of like Brenner in that regard. Like, what is the
yeah,
obsession? Like, I hope for Brenner we're finally going to get an explanation on that, because I think the big question that kind of goes to the series was like, hey, what is the obsession with Elle? Because like Brenner puts in helicopters in the sky, but Colin gets all the way to Chicago. And the explanation, the implied explanation to me anyway, is that, um, 11 is Brenner's actual biological child. And so he's more, kind of obsessed with her or favors her. And I think, like you were mentioning earlier, you know, um, I think that's kind of, to me, that's the implication as to why he's kind of favors her and the other kids are jealous, because they don't get it. They're like, what's so special about this girl? She's no better than the rest of us, or she's slower in some things. To me, that's part of it. But also, I feel like maybe he knew that, like, the power she had, you know what I mean? Like, he was, like, not everything Henry said was wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what makes it so compelling, is that so much of what he says to Elle before it's revealed that he's Vecna is that, what he's saying is correct. Like, he's wrong, but so is Brenner. Um, and so like that's something I really hope they explore in the final season. I think they will. That, what is it about Elle? Because you're right. Like, why would you, like, the future kills he does seem to be like, in his mind, they're mercy killings, right? These people are suffering. I'm relieving them of their suffering. I'm going to make a new world, angel of death. But you're right. Why kill a bunch of kids with superpowers, especially when you know a bunch of those little shits are evil, and you can like, like you can use that,
yeah.
right? Although part of me kind of wondered, because he wanted Elle to stay in the supply closet, and he was really mad when he should come out. And part of it was, okay, I'm going to take these guys out. I can't control them. I can't raise them. I can't do this, because he'd worked with them enough. But Elle was different. He saw someone he could manipulate or raise, kind of the way Brenner had. And I think what surprises him and also surprised Brenner, I think they both had the same, probably because that's the person like that would have raised him after that point, raised him in quotes there. They both have this thing where they don't expect I think they expect Elle to be a lot more pliable in terms of being able to control her than she actually is. And when push comes to shove, she has this innate sense of right and wrong that they don't have.
Yeah.
And psychologically, something I come back to is because we know that her mother, like we see those memories of her mother being there for her and loving her and wanting her from birth and coming to rescue her. Is that like there've been studies on this now that basically the kind of love and affection you receive at a very young age, like when you were a baby,
Hmm.
that continues to, resonate and become part of you as you grow older. I mean, of course, you can overcome those things, but the fact that she comes from that loving base, I
Hmm.
think definitely has an impact. And I think that's something that makes her a great character is you see that like that's what surprises the people around who think they can control her. And I think that's why she flourishes so greatly when
Hmm.
she's brought into, when Harper takes her in and the buyers take her in, and she's surrounded by friends. These are people who understand how powerful she is, who share that sense of right and wrong with her. So I think that's interesting, and I hope we kind of get into that because yeah, why kill a bunch of kids that have superpowers if you're gonna take over the world? Like I want to know his reasoning there.
So do I. I think if and when they explain the nature of their powers next season and kind of where they originated and what exactly how exactly it is they're able to do what they're able to do, I think could definitely explain a lot because it's like Dr. Brenner kind of touched on this season is it's a lot of mental um, in terms of her abilities. Um, but that's one part of the show I still don't understand, and I probably never will, but that's okay. um, so yeah, so the rest of that scene in the script is like basically the same as on screen. Brenner uh, shocks this child who begs for mercy, and it's a really tough scene. Like even though like this kid is a jerk and did really awful stuff to Eleven and threatened to kill her, it really is tough to watch because it's a child, and forcing those tiny kids as well to watch this as
Yeah, the
well.
little ones are so scared.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's yeah, it's definitely tough to watch for sure.
watch and like you're right. I feel like most of the scene is verbatim. Something that I did notice is we commented on this last time, but Brenner is much kinder in the script than he is with 11 than he is in the final product. Like something I noticed is when they're in the infirmary, in the script, he's much kinder and he said, keep your eyes open. But in the final version, he says, try not to blink. And it's a much more detached performance. And I think credit on that has to go to Matthew Modine on that one, which I think makes perfect sense. And I understand that they were trying to, because this is his final arc, as far as we know, right? So I understand the Duff brothers were trying to kind of humanize him a bit as kind of get back more into his kind of not his backstory, but just more in his arc, I guess. But I think Matthew Modine made the right choice there with his portrayal because you have Owens kind of as the counterbalance. So
Hmm.
Owens is very much humanized after that point of like, oh my God, what has he done? In contrast, you have Brenner who is, cold and calculating to the bitter end. And I think because of that, and that feels like a very collaborative decision. I don't think Matthew just randomly rolled up a set and was like, I'm doing it this way. That seems to me like a very collaborative decision where he's like, he was playing it that way. He's like, oh, can I try this? And the Duffer Brothers and all the actors have said that, it's a collaborative process and they're always very open to that, which I think is great. And I think what's particularly great about that is in his final moments, because of performance and because in his mind, you can tell he's done nothing wrong right up to the end. And even that moment when Elle calls on the fact of what he did to her mother, and he completely justifies it and tries to drug her. So in those last moments when he lays down, he wants Elle's forgiveness, and she doesn't give it to him. That is so much more satisfying, I think, as a viewer, because this is a guy who showed no mercy, no compassion to the very end, and now he wants Eleven's forgiveness, and you're like, yeah, go girl, like no, like don't give it to him. And I saw someone comment that it's so rare in media to see women or girls have scenes or arcs where it's acknowledged that, you know, you're acknowledging or forgiving for what happened, but not that doesn't make it okay. Like that sense of like, I can forgive you, forgive myself piece, but that doesn't make what you did okay. Or no, I'm not giving you that forgiveness because what you did was not okay. That is so rare. And I love that Eleven got to have that moment. So it really felt earned in part because of the performance. I also noticed that in the script, there says that, wow, I don't know, retry that sentence. In the script, it says there's like noticeable bruising on Elle. But in the scene, there isn't. It sounds like they've maybe jumped forward more time. Like in the script, you're supposed to be like right after it happened versus this is a little while later. Or maybe they just tried it on Millie Bobby Brown. I'm like, oh, this doesn't look great on screen. I also noticed that like there's a bunch of stuff in the script about the other numbers, the other kids shooting Elle threatening glances. But in the actual scene, we see everyone's just kind of looking straight ahead, which I feel like made more sense because then it's like it makes the whole shock of the thing more impactful. Like if they're shooting threatening glances, it's like, all right, well, you had that coming. Like you very obviously did it, and now you're looking at her in a threatening manner. Because they don't do that, I think it makes it all the more shocking because like they think, oh, Brenner has no idea. And as we learn in season 4, he's got cameras in every room, he's got hidden cameras, he's got all this stuff. Especially because in the script, Brenner says to call the kid right away, but in the script it's implied. And I really love it in storytelling when I get something spelling out something in the script, but then you imply it on screen. I think that, show instead of tell um, is still important. And I think that's also why the order of the scene is slightly changed, like the scene where they're all standing in the room with the collaring. And I think that's why they did it, so that you get that implied and it builds that tension more. Whereas if you spell the whole thing out, that tension doesn't build in the same way. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, so did I. It was again, it's a very tough scene to watch. And sometimes I just skip it because I can't watch it because, um I know I've heard on some uh podcasts talking about Brenner this season and him in flashbacks of earlier on, he seemed like they made him seem kind of like a good man who, probably misunderstood, who, after this event became bad, but he was good before. And this scene right here just goes to show you, no, what he's doing is bad. I mean, I do
Yeah,
agree
he's
that there
never been
are,
that guy. Like I don't when
yeah,
I hear that, I'm like, what are we watching the same? Because from day one, from season one, his character is consistent all the way through. Like all the way
yeah.
through.
And
So
the scene that gets referenced in that is in uh, uh, episode 1 of season 4 when Brenner is with 10. Like this is in the first like 10 minutes of the episode. And he's laughing and stuff. And we don't, we're not really used to seeing Brenner like that. And I mean, I do think that very, very deep down in his own twisted way, Brenner, you know, care, had some sort of affection for these children. Um, I'm not gonna say that Martin Brenner hates children. Um, and so I will say it was kind of nice to see a little bit of a little bit of a happy moment from Brenner, but still, I mean, the fact that this child is in the lab doing these experiments and stuff and everything that Brenner's doing, he's still doing, you know, immoral things. And um, we can't discount that. Now, I do think that what happened after this event. Um, I do think that it really changed Brenner from bad to worse. You know what I mean? Um, and that's kind of how we got in the Brenner of today. And even when we see him in season 4 in the present day, you kind of start to think, I mean, after season 1, did he change any? What's his life been like? And then when we get to chapter 8, um, and he definitely, you know, goes off the rails and goes unhinged, and it's like, oh well, no, he's he's still the same
Yeah,
Martin Brenner as he always was, and
yeah,
he's never gonna let 11 just leave, even if he took her back to Hawkins. She did the deed,
no,
he was gonna take her back. I mean, that there's no, he probably would
yeah.
have chipped her as well, like he did Henry. I mean,
Oh,
there's no
100%. That
way.
when he was trying to dog her, I was like, yeah, no, 100%. 100%. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think he was the massacre hardened him so that any kind of like softness or affection you could show went away. You don't see any of that post massacre, except there is the odd moment, I think, in season 4. But as we learn at the like you said in episode 8, like we learn that has all been an act. He's not only putting it on for Elle, but he's putting it on for Owens and everyone else in the lab. It is an act to get what he wants. And Owens doesn't realize he's being played. Like he knows that he knows Brett unhinged. Like we see him comment on this. He's like, he knows he's unhinged. He knows the guy's probably playing him to some extent, I'm sure. But the guy's such a charlatan. He's so good at getting people to believe it. He's so good at it. And he convinces Owens it's the only way. And I'm sure Owens looked into other options, but it's the only thing they can find. And like you see that evolution where he starts to realize, like, as they're at the lab and Elle isn't getting better, like, that line where he's like, he starts to look at Brenner and be like, have I just completely destroyed like this poor kid's life and put her family in danger again and compromise my principles, my morals, my family's safety for absolutely nothing? Like, is he just doing this to screw with her? Like, have I been completely played here? And you really see that. So like, yeah, no, he went from bad to worse. It hardened him, and yeah, he was never like the whole thing where Owens is like, we agreed this wouldn't be a prison, and I was like, Owens, you may have agreed to that, but Brenner, freaking no, he said that, but he didn't mean it, and like, oh, like I'm really
Yeah,
interested to see the conversation between Owens, Brenner, and not Brenner, Owens, Joyce, and Hopper in season 5. Because he didn't bring what really happened on that car ride back. He gave them a sanitized version. And they know that's BS. There's no way
yeah,
they don't. But
yeah,
they're so excited to get back to their kids that they were like, my kind of interpretation of that was like, all right, they know he's lying. But they're like, I want to get back to my kids. So we're going to deal with this later. But at
yeah,
some point,
and,
like that's
and
coming up.
I have no doubt that Hopper's been filled in about something because, I mean, I know this is, 2 episodes from this one, but it has to be said, when he and Eleven reunite, he's not surprised at all by her hair. He doesn't say, what happened to your hair? Why did you shave it? They just go, oh, your hair is just like mine. Very touching scene, but also very telling because
Yeah,
it's
he definitely
like,
knows some things, but there's definitely stuff
yeah,
Owens left out, is my point. There's definitely stuff Owens left out.
yeah. I mean, I take it as that they're saving that conversation for next season, because it's just like,
Yeah.
apparently Eleven and Mike didn't talk anything about him confessing his love for her and that long car ride either, which I refuse to believe. But anywho, uh, so after a very brutal scene to watch, we get somewhat of a softer, lighter scene. We go back to Hawkins in the Upside Down with Steve, Robin, Nancy, and Eddie. and they are headed towards the Wheeler house because the bats have um, circled around the other gate. They need a way to get out. They can't get out with the bats are still there. So what do they need? They need weapons to be able to kill the bats and get rid of them. And so the police station can't walk all the way to the police station because that's too far. But Nancy's like, oh, you know what? I have guns. Let's go to my house where we can retrieve those guns. But before they get to the Wheeler house, Eddie and Steve have a little talk, a little chit chat. And again, it's basically verbatim. You know, Steve thanks Eddie for saving him, and he's like, yeah, that was a real Aussie move you pulled back there. And Steve, of course, is like, Aussie? And he's like, yeah, took a bite out of that bat. And Steve just, he still doesn't get it. Apparently, he is not a big pop culture guy, which is surprising to me, by the way. But
Well, I
anyway,
wouldn't say that. Like, to be honest, the whole Aussie biting the head off a bat thing is well known now. But I feel like back then, like if you were a metalhead, you would know that. But I
yeah,
don't know if other people would. Like it would have been in the paper when it happened, but is Steve reading the newspaper? You know what I mean? Like I think it's not as well, may not have been as well known outside of metalhead circles back then. I don't know. That was kind of my take on it.
yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I can't really see Steve being into metal, but I don't know. I kind of do see him as the type to watch MTV, though. Um,
Yeah, but MTV would not have aired that. There's no way.
well, yeah, back
There's
then
no
they
way.
wouldn't have. Now, I mean, yeah, but
Now,
yeah,
yes,
back
but back
then,
then,
because back then it was
no.
strictly music videos. Back then, it was definitely
Yeah.
not what it is today.
Yeah.
Um, and so then, they have this very touching conversation actually about Dustin, and I thought it was very sweet because, it's kind of like Steve is being reassured that, even though Dustin has, found this new friend in Eddie, he still really looks up to Steve, and I thought that was really cool of Eddie to bring that up. Like, hey, man, don't be jealous. Like, you know, he's still crazy about you, man. And then we get Eddie has this basically a monologue in itself, um, talking about, um, Robin and Nancy and how, they jumped right in after Steve and he was too scared. But there is a line in the script that is different from um, on screen, and that is when Eddie says, quote, I just couldn't accept that Steve Harrington was actually a good dude. Rich parents, popular, girls love him, not a douche. No way. No way. And then of course he does give the line about his own personal months in doctrine. Um, but the first part of that is not the uh, in the show. At least not when I watched it. Which I mean, at
Wait,
this
which
point,
part?
the one about Steve Harrington was actually a good dude. Rich parents, popular, girls love him.
No,
Not a
that's in the
douche.
show.
Oh, okay.
That's
I
in the
don't
show.
remember that. Okay, sorry,
There is
folks.
a part though. There's a part though. So he
Okay,
says,
Jasmin.
I would get her back, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes is not in there.
Gotcha,
But everything
gotcha.
else is. Well, the language is a little bit different. It's more colloquial than it is in the script, but
Mm-hmm.
so it is slightly different. But that is in there. As a Stancy shipper, I can attest the fact that that is in there.
Gotcha. I should have just let you do that rundown because I knew that you would probably know that. But yeah, because I
Yes, I
definitely
have the
don't
most notes
remember that.
about this section. I have many things to say. So
Yes. And this is um one of those things where they're in the upside down. And this is one thing that I kind of wish they would have done this season, and hopefully next season, they'll do this, but I don't really know if by then it'll have really even be important. But I wish they would have just had just, maybe 30 seconds of them just walking in silence in the upside down so that we, as the audience, could listen. You know what I mean? So that we could have heard, the sounds of this place, because in this scene, you can faintly hear in the distance what sounds like moaning, you know, kind of a little roar type of thing. And I believe in season one, uh, when Nancy's in the Upside Down, and then when Hopper and Joyce are in there looking for Will, um, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Jasmin, but you don't hear anything like that then. But now, you do when they're in season four, and that's why I kind of wish they would have done that. In hindsight, I feel like there's a good reason why they didn't, because they don't really want us to uh, to have any semblance at this point in time of any army of monsters or beast, because that comes to light. Well, um, Nancy talks about that in the following episode. But yeah, just for my own personal enjoyment, I would have loved to have them just walk around for a few seconds, not talking, so that we could, just hear the sounds of the Upside Down. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, they could have had like a few minutes, like even like a minute or half a minute before Eddie and Steve start talking, where you could have heard it more. I
Yeah.
agree because like now that the season's come out, people started analyzing it. I've heard people commenting, and so now when I rewatch it, I hear things I didn't hear before. But I think it's supposed to be faint in the background because you're right. I think in the early seasons, the only sounds you really hear is like I think creaking of like stuff around them, and
Hmm.
then you hear like Joyce when like Jonathan, Nancy, and Steve are fighting the Demogorgon. She faintly hears his voice. You can hear the voices like you can with Dustin this season, but I don't think you hear the other things. Although the vines aren't there in the previous. Well, the vines are there, but they're not quite as advanced. It's not in kind of the advanced stage of decomp. We see it in season four, and it sounds like the creatures and the place has evolved since then. So I think you're right. I think it's they're trying to subtly show the progression would be what I think they're doing. But yeah, that would have been cool.
Yeah. So then another earthquake happens, and Robin throws out the line of second on my least favorite list is earthquakes, which Robin, I think you should probably get used to that for for a little while, because it's gonna happen again. Uh, and then they finally get through the woods, and Nancy apparently notices something familiar through the woods, and it's the Wheeler house. She sees the Wheeler house, and she says, "Come on." And so they walk all the way past all the power lines through the Upside Down um, to the Wheeler house, and then um, we get some more imagery of the power lines and the decay on them. Super cool shot. And then we hear Dustin say, "Steve, do you copy? Nancy, Robin." And we're back in the Wheeler house, but this time in the right side up. And Dustin is, of course, um, in the bathroom, pretending to use the bathroom. He's sitting on an only you could get in the 1980s black toilet on his little radio, saying, we've been collared by the law. I repeat, we have been collared by the law." And then when no one answers, he flushes and says the S word. And that line, well, he doesn't say that directly in the script, but it is on the screen. And I always thought it was kind of funny, that he like I like that touch they added of him saying that, because it's like he was in there actually using the bathroom when he really wasn't. And then we cut to him going through um, the living room past Holly, who is playing with a light bright. foreshadowing, I think, yes. And then there's, the police officers are talking to the parents, and Lucas, he joins Lucas in the kitchen where they have discussion about Watergate, and then of course Erica comes in and it's like, "What are you guys talking about?" And one of my favorite lines from Erica about gun smoke, and then about spill your guts, cow puncher, which is just that scene makes me laugh like every time. It's so funny. And let's see. Then Erica's like, "Well, I'll tell him what you found under your bed." He's like, "What under your bed?" And Lucas is like really freaked out because he does not want Dustin to know what's under his bed, which is really we don't know the answer to that, and I mean we never will. But obviously, it's probably Playboy magazines or something gross like that. Let's see. So then, after much coercion from Erica, Lucas is finally like, "Hey, you know what? I'll tell you. We think the killer is a dark wizard from the Upside Down. We've been looking for him, but he's in the Upside Down. Can't reach him. But now we know there's a gate at Lover's Lake. We just have to get there and to the gate. So that we can, get to Vecna. But the police are kind of in their way, and we can't, actually do anything about it now because they won't let us leave." And then he's like, "If you tell anyone about this, includes mom and dad and Tina, and he does not want Tina, who is, I think, Erica's friend. I think that was Erica's friend in season 2, I believe. That's like when she's first mentioned. And then he's like, he threatens her. He's like, "I'm gonna smother you in your sleep." And Erica, still like, "Okay, whatever." And Lucas repeats himself. And this is all basically verbatim dialogue between the script and on screen. But then, Erica's like, "Why is there an open gate in Lover's Lake?" And she thinks, and I really love, how they included this, because Erica thinks it's the Russians, the commies, as she calls them. And Lucas is like, "No, the commies, they didn't, they're not the cause this time. They have, as far as Lucas, without really saying anything, is like, as far as we know, the Russians they have no connection with this Vecna guy at all." Which we still don't know, if they really do or not. It still remains unclear. We didn't get full answer to that in season 4. But yeah, Lucas is like, "No, commies didn't do it," and there's, "Well, who did?" And then she's like, "It just opened up, for fun." And Lucas is like, "We have no idea what you're talking about." And then Dustin brings up, what I really like this quote he brings up is, he says, she doesn't, but she brings up an essential question, and this is where Jasmine and I got our essential question for this episode from the man himself, Dustin. He's like, how did Watergate open? Two gates have been opened so far. One by 11, which was the Mother Gate in 1983. One by the Russians in season 3. And we know it's not the Russians or 11 this time. And then he, immediately in the script, it says light bulb, like he gets, gets an idea. And then Dustin starts pacing. And then this is verbatim in the script as it is on screen. Dustin says, "There's one thing we've never understood, which is why, why is Vecna killing people? What's his motive? Killing teens? It's always seemed too random, too prosaic. On top of that, how does the mind flayer figure into all this? Maybe this is it. This is the answer." And of course, Lucas is like, "What's the answer?" And then, of course, Karen comes in and is offering one of the officers something to drink, so they have to leave. And so Lucas and Dustin exit and go to the hallway, and Erica joins them. And then, Dustin is continuing to give his hypothesis, and he's like, any questions? How did 11 open the Mother Gate? And Lucas is like, she made contact with a Demogorgon. And Dustin said, psychic contact. And Lucas is like, just like Vecna when he cast his spell. And so they go on hypothesizing, and Dustin's like, what if he's not simply killing? What if he's making a powerful psychic connection with his victims, a connection so powerful that, it can tear a hole in the fabric of time and space? And Lucas, of course, answers the question. He's opening gates. And they're like, why? And Lucas like, to take over the world. And then Dustin says, and who do we know who wants to take over the world? And Lucas says, the mind flayer. And then Dustin gives that big theory of, what if the Demogorgon was just a foot soldier, and what if Vecna is his 5-star general? And this is a part where many people, there's two sides. One side thinks, okay, Dustin was wrong this time. He's usually the one who's right, the one that we look to for answers. And then there's the other half who say, well, he's right. Vecna, the Mind Flayer is controlling Vecna, not the other way around. And we're going to see that in season 5. And it's going to be, a big plot twist of this particle monster that Vecna himself shaped into a spider-like being, or form, rather, is controlling things. So, Jasmine, do you have anything to say about that, what I've just mentioned?
Yeah, I think for me, I think Justin's idea is a good one, but I think from what we see in the flashbacks that when Vecna is, talking to Elle and showing things to Nancy, I wouldn't say he's wrong. I'd say he's half right because they think that the Mind Flayer is sentient and able to control things. But what we learn as the audience is that Vecna created the Mind Flayer. So I don't think something you created could be controlling you. But other people have also talked about how Victor Creel said we had 1 month of peace in that house. We know something happened to that 1 month mark. So and you talk about how a demon was, taking residence in their home. If this demon spirit thing is part of the dust particles that created the Mind Flayer, it's part of the Upside Down, if that's all part and parcel of one thing, I think it could be possible that thing is influencing Vecna and Henry to do what he's doing and has from that 1 month mark. But I don't think that's specifically the Mind Flayer. Like, it's taking the form of the Mind Flayer because that's what Henry created, but I don't think sentient on its own, the mind flayer is doing that, because the mind flayers we know what Vecna created. Is it possible the demon smoke monster particle thing is in charge and manipulating Henry and has been since that day? Yes, absolutely. But so I don't think that makes Justin wrong. I just think it means he doesn't have all the information. And I think it's either the reverse, either like Vecna is the big head honcho in charge and he's created the mind flayer and the mind flayer works for him. I don't know. I'm not even sure the mind flayer is sentient though. Because from what we've now know, I'm like, I think it's just a tool that Vecna is using. I think that was kind of part of the reveal. Either that or it's all part and parcel of this thing that's in control of everything, including Vecna. So I feel like it's either one or the other. I don't think it's the twist where it's like, oh yeah, the mind flayer is control, like sentient on its own is controlling Vecna. It's just based off what we've seen, that doesn't make sense to me, unless it's part of something larger on its own. But that's kind of where I fall on that.
I'm going to save my answer for that until we get to the end. I mean, not because I don't have anything to say, but because, I think it's just best, to save my answer for the end. That's right, folks, making you wait. I'm kidding, of course. But I mean, yeah, if you definitely want to skip everything else and just go to the end of today's episode of my answer, it's okay because it's going to look like we got a bunch of plays anyway, so it's good for
Yeah,
us.
if you have
It's
to
a
skip all the
win-win.
way ahead, it's gonna show up as a full play. So big win for
Yes,
us.
yes, it's a
Um,
win-win.
it's a win-win. And like I said, this is the part I have the most notes on. So do you want me to kind of get into that? Or is there anything else that you want to kind of address in terms of the question of the episode before I kind of get into my extensive notes on this scene?
We're talking about the next scene of Nancy and company, correct?
Well, my notes start from the beginning of like when they wind up in the upside down in like because it's into the where they go into the right side up. I kind of have it all as one thing, like the upside down, like the upside down, and then the Wheeler House in right side up and the upside down. I have all of my notes together.
Gotcha, gotcha. I just want to say real quick before we move on to that. Erica says another funny line. That was, she asks for them to be kind and rewind, which
I know that one got me.
definitely speaking for the audience there. Because when I first watched it, it was quite a bit to take in. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So Jasmine, you can continue to your points.
I love the Be Kind Rewind as a 90s, like as an 80s or 90s kid. Be Kind Rewind. I mean, kids these days will never know the
The
just
lingo.
the lingo, but just the hell that was you get the VHS with Blockbuster and the last person you had did not rewind, and you're like, now I have to rewind this,
Yeah.
or it's got to go back today, or you're gonna get fined. You're gonna get fined, and like you're like, I have to quit. You're like, hang on, and you're trying to do it, and your mom's like, we have to go, and you're like, okay, I'm rewinding the tape. Jesus,
Or
you'll
the
never
tape,
know. You'll never
or like the tape comes out,
yeah.
and sometimes it can't go back in,
Unspools, and
folks.
you're like, ah.
Sometimes if you get lucky, it could have gone back in, but most of the time, if it all came out, you might as well just
You're
go
trying
and
to
buy a new one.
respool. It's not
Yeah.
working, especially when it's a rento. You're like, you just jam it back in there, gave it back. You're like,
Yeah.
ah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Oh, they'll never know the hell that was. Be kind, rewind.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So there are definitely parts of these scenes that are verbatim, as Ashley was talking about. I've noticed there's a bunch of, I think, little changes that were probably either done on the day or just adding or subtracting things to the scene as needed. But there are a couple of major changes. I think the two that stuck out to me was Eddie and Steve's conversation, and then the scene where Nancy, Robin, and Eddie are in her room in the upside down. Now, some of that ties into the lore, so I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Ashley. But to start off with, something I noticed was Robin starts the scene in the upside down, which is not in the script. So she starts the scene by asking if they could have tried a road or something less creepy, and Nancy reassures her. So I noticed that they kind of beefed up the interactions between Nancy and Robin in the final product, where you see much more of their friendship and them kind of getting to know each other and building that rapport. You also have a lot more scenes where Robin is much more involved or taking an active role or leading the scene, which I think either naturally came out, or I think, they've said they kind of played to the performances the actors give them. So I think part of that was possibly, like, oh, we need to kind of give Maya Hawke more to kind of work with here, you know? So I thought that was interesting and a good change, kind of how they elevated Max this season, which he didn't have as large of a role in the previous seasons. There's a lot of descriptions in this scene I really, really love. The first is as they walk, Steve signs off to Eddie, and in a very awkward guy way. I really loved that. That made me laugh. And it's, you can tell that the actors, took that to heart. I really love the line where the description where it says, "We can tell this means a lot to Steve," when Eddie is talking to him about Dustin and how much the kid worships him. As I said before, the dialogue here is a lot less formal and more colloquial, which I think would have probably been the actors, which makes sense because like the people writing this stuff are significantly older than the ages these characters would be and older than the actors. So I think it's always great when you let your actors kind of be, make it more colloquial. Otherwise, it sounds very stiff. And I love that they let the actors kind of play with it in that way. Steve tells Eddie to give himself a break, which is not in the script. So that might have been what you were thinking of when you were like, oh, that one part isn't in the script. So there are a few lines that don't make it in there. Some other things I thought were interesting is there's a direction in the script that says Steve tries to hide the fact that this means a lot to him when Eddie starts talking about, Nancy, he thinks Nancy is still in love with him and, her diving was an unambiguous sign of true love. But in this scene, it's very obvious how much this means to Steve. And I think that was a good choice because him trying to hide it, I think to me would have come across as, oh, he's pretending like he doesn't care. And Steve has never been that way about Nancy, not once. So I think that was the right way to play it. I think Joe Carey made the right, call there. It's not about I would get her back is in both, but he has a follow-up line saying I would get her back whatever it takes is the script, but not the scene. And I kind of feel like maybe that's because, like Eddie had made his point, and so I felt like maybe that was like beating him over the head with it, which wasn't really necessary. I mean, his line, which I loved, but unambiguous sign of true love is great, but it's also a little bit cheesy. And I saw people comment on that. So I feel like maybe they toned down other portions of it because of that. Also, like, again, I think this is kudos to the actors in this script. Steve is described as being flustered in this scene, but in the final product, he's very serious. He's clearly taking what Eddie is saying to heart, looking thoughtfully at Nancy. And I think that was the right call because him being flustered at the Creel house made sense, but him being flustered when Eddie's like, man, she's clearly still in love with you. I mean, that doesn't really make sense. Nancy's not saying it to him. It's Eddie, this guy that he doesn't know that well. Like he's just getting to know. So I think that was a good call on Joe's part. Something that made me laugh was in the script, Steve says, God damn it, instead of Jesus when the earthquake hits. But saying like Jesus becomes Eddie's catchphrase this season. So I thought that was interesting. And which makes me wonder if like, obviously Eddie being like, Jesus Christ, when the bats come at them, if that just became a running joke or if it has more to do with like how the actors would actually swear in real life. Because when you're swearing about something, it's like if you're saying something you wouldn't normally say, it sounds really awkward. So I love that kind of became Eddie's catchphrase, and you see that continued. Ashley, I wanted your thoughts on this. I noticed that really epic shot we have when they come out of the woods towards the Wheeler house. I did not catch any of this the first time through, but I noticed that when they go from the tree line to the Wheeler house in the upside down, there's something that looks like a shed or maybe a garage across from the Wheeler house, like in the grass. But there's nothing else except downed power lines. And I went back and compared it, and I was like, wait a minute, there should be other houses around the Wheeler house. There are other houses like on the cul-de-sac in the right side up, but none of that is there in the upside down. There's just this one shed garage thing, downed power lines, and then the Wheeler house. And I hadn't noticed that. I'm like, that's got to be intentional. Like, that has to be intentional because otherwise, why not just make it look exactly the same? So I was really curious as to what your thoughts were on why that is, why only the Wheeler house and this one shed. Like, what is that?
Yeah, I kind of thought maybe it was a production issue because it's so dark that maybe you can't see everything. And um, one thing I noticed too this season, in general, like whenever we went to the Wheeler House, like even in the right side up, is how big their yard was this season. Like something about it looked different than in previous seasons. I mean, we know that Lucas is and Mike are neighbors, but we don't know how far down from each other they live. We don't really know um, how far apart they live from their houses are from other neighbors. It's never been addressed. They never. I mean, there was that one scene in season one with the van, but it was moving so fast you can't really um, tell a lot. But yeah, I don't know. Again, it could have just been like a production thing, or it could be intentional. I have no idea. Um, I wish I knew, but that's the only thing that I can come up with.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that because I rewatched it. And at first I thought, oh, because it's dark, but then I rewatched it and I'm like, no, their houses are not there. And we know it's a cul-de-sac, but I'm like, at the very least, there should be houses on either side of Nancy's. Because we never get an indication that like it's a house on its own or that it's at like the very end. You know what I mean? Like if you're at the end of the cul-de-sac or like a U shape, at the very
Hmm.
least they should have a neighbor, even if it's a really big, like even if the yard is massive, like I rewatched a couple of times and I'm like, yeah, these other houses should be there. So even if their close neighbors quite far, it's still a cul-de-sac. Like it can't be country yard big, you know? So I'm
Yeah,
really curious if that's, and I don't think it's production because that would have like those shots would have had to been CGI anyway. So I'm like, it would have
yeah,
been easy for them to pop in the houses or even just the side of a house. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I'm really curious as to what that was. And it kind of, to me, it kind of leads into okay, are only certain things duplicated the upside down? Because the theory that we've kind of been sold here is that well, it's an exact replica, but with vines and it's kind of decaying. But how accurate is that? Because there was supposed to be that epic flyover shot this season, and they chose not to. So I wonder if that would have given too much away, too expensive. I don't know, but I feel like there's got to be something there, and it kind of to me leads back to if Will somehow influenced the upside down when he was stuck there, like subconsciously, or Vecna pulled something from his memories. Like certain things would obviously stand out in Will's mind, like the Wheeler house. So that's going to be really clearly defined. But the other houses around it probably wouldn't be because he's never been in them. He doesn't know the people that live there. So, like, if we're going off that, or like what that combined with what Henry knew for the time he lived there, only certain places, do you know what I mean? Like only certain places would stand out to you at like 10 or 12. So I wonder if that's what it is. It's only places that stand out because we've only really seen the Wheeler house and the Byers house and the Creel house. And the Wheelers and the Byers are places that, are importance to Will, that he knows really well. And the Creel house is important to Henry. So I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that all the other homes just aren't there. Or I guess we see the trailer park, but that's where Chrissy died. So do you know what I mean? Like it's
yeah,
the only places that are connected to something, not the other places. So, I mean, does something happen once people go in there? Like, there's gotta be more to it than that.
yeah.
So I'm interested to see what that is. One of the things I noticed too is there's a bunch of notes in the part where they're in the right side up at the Wheeler house that say like see appendix 2 or see appendix whatever. And I'm really curious as to what's in those appendixes because my sense is that it's kind of either like background information or notes for the extra lines or like suggestions maybe for the other actors. Because I
Yeah,
noticed where you
so
have,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so the appendix is like, an attachment. So it's like, how in the scene, like in the show, when after Erica says, please be kind, rewind, and then Dustin starts explaining, and then we fade to the lights flickering, and then we fade into the scene of Nancy and everybody else going to the Wheeler house. So, you can hear Dustin like explaining, stuff to Erica as, they fade out of that scene. So, when I read through the whole script, the appendixes are like at the very end of the script. And it's just that it just gives you that dialogue of um, what Dustin and Lucas were telling Erica, and they were basically just explaining like everything, that's happened thus far in the show as it pertains to Elle opening the gate and stuff. Because Erica, to my knowledge, doesn't know about any of that because, I just as I just read a few moments ago, she thought that the Russians were opening the gate again, and they're like, no, no, it's not the Russians, this time. And so they were kind of filling her in. So that's the where the appendix um comes into play.
Okay, that's what I was kind of wondering. That's what I kind of figured it was. But thank you for that useful explanation. And I would love
Yes.
to see, I wish they'd included the appendixes in this because, like, I would love to see the lines of the direction that the other actors were given, especially the officers and the parents, because
Hmm.
we hear pieces of their dialogue. Like, the fact that Mr. Sinclair asks Chief Powell if they need lawyers and he says no. And obviously, as we fade in and out, there's more dialogue. So, like, I like I like the fact that like these people were given dialogue so they knew what to keep saying, even though they knew by denoting it as an appendix that like, okay, we're gonna fade out when you're saying this, so we're not gonna hear most of it. But just in case it was in the background of a scene or when they chose to fade, which I think is better than just leaving your actors and being like, I don't know, talk about something. Like that's, you know,
Yeah.
that would be challenging. Um, Something else I noticed is that in the script, Dustin crosses through the TV room and sees Holly playing with her light bright. But in the actual scene, he almost bumps into her in the kitchen holding the light bright, which I thought was a good. I felt like that was better foreshadowing because it's like also that way that like kids almost bump into you or you almost bump into them. That
Hmm.
felt more natural, and I thought that was cute. Rather than him just walking past her. I don't know if it would have been as direct foreshadowing. And I also thought it kind of like, again, show don't tell. It showed us a lot very quickly. It showed that in the same way that like Will basically grew up at the Wheeler house, everyone is so comfortable with Holly and she's so comfortable with them that like, if you don't even have a guest over, you behave differently. They're so comfortable with each other that she's like she's almost bumps into Dustin. They're both like, whoopsie. Like he's like, oopsie. And she's like, eh. And she just kind of keeps motoring in that way that like
Hmm.
kids do. And it's not a rudeness. It's just like, that's just how kids are going to go, when they're around somebody that they're comfortable with. And like, I love the fact that Holly's unfazed. Like her parents and everyone else's parents are in like the living room talking about like, do we need lawyers? We're gonna be arrested. Nancy's missing, and like Holly's unbothered. She's like, this happens every year. Like I'm gonna just go play with my light, right? It'll get
Just
resolved.
like,
Like
don't worry, she's fine. She's fine.
she's fine. Like I feel like she's just so acclimatized, and I
Yeah.
think there's more of Nancy and Mike in her than maybe her parents realize. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
Karen made that comment last season about, I think we're switched to the hospital. You have this fight in you that I don't have. And we see that fight in Mike and Nancy, but we also see like Holly noticed that the trees were moving. She noticed Will trying to reach out to her. She's obviously, I think, brighter than people around her giving her credit for. And the fact that
Hmm.
this kid is unfazed, where they're just like, yeah, this is what happens here. I think she just knows and she's just kind of minding her own business. I wouldn't I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of reveal in the final season where it's like, yeah, I've known the whole time. Just kind of biding my time over here, minding my
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
business. But I love that. And this is a small thing, but I noticed that Erica is drinking Minute Maid and not grape juice. Like in the script, it says she's drinking grape juice, and in the scene, it's Minute Maid. And I'm assuming that's a personal preference. I personally don't like grape juice either. So maybe Priya's like, nah, I don't like grape juice. I don't want to drink that. Or maybe that's just what they had. Um, the other thing I was thinking of, you mentioned this, but what is the deal with Lucas and Tina? Like, why he says, like, especially if you tell anyone, especially Tina. And that's the same Tina from season 3, where like I'm supposed to be Tina's covering for me. I'm supposed to be Uncle Jack's buddy. Who the heck is Tina? And like, what is the deal between? And like, it seems to be implied that like whatever Lucas is under his bed has something to do with Tina. Like, who is Tina? How old is Tina? What is the situation with Tina? Like, I have questions about Tina.
I think Tina is might be Erica's friend, one of Erica's friends,
Yeah.
and could be a blabbermouth, and that's why Lucas doesn't want Erica to tell her. But I also thought, maybe if Erica has a babysitter, it could be Tina. I don't know. We've never seen Tina. She's only ever been mentioned. Hopefully we'll see Tina next season.
I want to
So,
see Tina next season. I want Tina to roll up. I want all these people they've been mentioning to suddenly just like, I don't know, like Tina if she's a babysitter, like Tina winds up looking after Holly or something. They're just like in the background. Like
yeah.
that would that would be great. And I also think, they've joked about not wanting to add too many new characters next season. I think a great way to accomplish, not expanding the cast too much, but telling your story is if you bring up characters you've already mentioned or who've been in the background or appeared in previous seasons, you're not bringing in new characters, but you are expanding. So I think that would be a great solution because I've said this before and I'll say it again. The only new character they need to add is a love interest for Will. There is no purpose to me to adding a random other new character with what they've set up this time that wouldn't just blow up the cast and like I don't think really serve a purpose.
Hmm.
So I would really, really love to see that. And this is a change I really, really liked. So in the scene, Lucas says, do you copy? And that's it. But in the actual scene we see, he says, do you understand? And he slides forward on his arms and says, do you copy? And I love that. Like that scene
Yeah.
between him and Erica is fantastic. And it perfectly captures that sibling dynamic.
Yeah.
And just the physical acting between Caleb and Priya in that scene is just awesome. Like it's
It
so well
is.
done. Um, let's see what else. Yeah, Justin's speech is pretty much identical. I learned from the script that random officer that Karen's offering the soda to is Officer Daniels. I was like, oh, okay, that guy has a name. I feel like maybe there was more context in the script that kind of got cut, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But that guy's name is Officer Daniels. And to be honest, the first time through, I thought that was one of the deputies. I didn't clock that it was I thought it was only the two of them there. Like I know we saw other guys in the background, but I didn't even clock that was a different person because that's not the focus of the scene. The focus of the scene is the kids talking in the kitchen. Um, the other thing that made me laugh was so in the script, the line was Lucas's line is saying that Elle made contact with the Demogorgon. In the and I don't know if this was like a blooper on Caleb's part or what this was, but in the final scene, it's changed to she contacted the Demogorgon. Which when I was rewatching it, I'm like, it makes it sound like she phoned him. It makes it sound
Yeah.
like she picked up the phone and called him.
Yeah.
Which I thought was hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like that feels like maybe he forgot the word and and the rest of the scene was good, so they just went with it. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like that was the
Yeah.
best take. Like and some other like Erica's lines in this entire scene are pure gold. She's super hilarious. But ones that got me were holy shit, that was incomprehensible.
Oh.
And
Yeah. Dustin talks fast anyway, so that's also why.
Yeah, that made me laugh. When you think she's gotten it, she's like, yeah. Or like Lyrica's line as we fade out. So what was that giant laser? Like, just her line delivery. The fact that she
Yeah,
went from like a background character to establish Lucas's home life to being like so full of like sass and amazing, hilarious lines. Like they really show
yeah,
her improv and her acting chops in this, and I love that.
yeah. And what I really
Uh,
like about Erica, not only in this scene, but just in this episode in general, with her dialogue is she's basically the audience in this moment. And that's like us going, well, what was all that about? Oh, why did, all that happen? Please be kind and rewind. Like, this is all a lot to take in at one time. So I really love, not only how that was written, but also how it was acted out on screen.
yeah, I totally agree. And then when we get back into the upside down, I noticed that Robin's line about the maid is slightly different, and I think it's better in the final version. It's more
Hmm.
colloquial, which I loved. This is a small thing, but in this, when they go up to Nancy's room, in the shoes, in the show, the final version, the shoes are red. Like in the script, it says the shoes are red, but in the final scene, they're white, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if that's significant or if that's just they found they had white shoes on hand, or if that looked better or popped more on screen or something. Um, and in Robin's lines, they basically say the same thing, but they're slightly different. You get more colloquial. This is something I also noticed in the scene where Nancy and Steve talk in the woods, that they kind of they adjust the timeline. So Holly is said to be 5 in the script, but 6 in the final version. I think that just somebody went in and recounted. And since we know they later had an issue with Will's birthday, cough, cough, they really should have counted for the entire script, or had Winona take a
Hmm.
look at it. But likewise, I think in the script, Steve says that either they broke up 3 years ago, and I think in the final version it's 2. So like they adjusted the timeline to make that line up. I think they were a bit off when they were writing. Um, and I've also noticed that like in that scene, Nancy grabs the cue cards first, but not in the script. She grabs them later.
Hmm.
The flashbacks with Steve are in the final version, but not the script, which I think is good because, like, as a big Stancy fan, I immediately was like, oh my God. But if that's not your ship, if that's not your ride or die, I get that people in the audience might have been like, wait, what does this have to do with anything? Like, what's with the cue card? So I like that they connected that for the audience. And I don't know if they always plan to do that, and that just wasn't in the script because the actors don't need it. Like that's an editing note, so
Hmm.
maybe that's why. Something I thought was interesting in terms of major changes was the final version calls more attention to Steve and Angie's relationship than the script. Like this in the script, it's kind of incidental, but in the final version, we see it's much more prominent. It's much more of a focal point in that scene. As viewers, our attention is drawn to it, and I think that that's because, as they're trying to do setup for the following season, I think there was a lot of really great work done in this season where, like we said, it's a show for smart people. They're expecting you to get it. They're not going to hold your hand. They're basically kind of showing us what they want to direct our attention to, um, in terms of the editing and flashbacks and what they're showing us. Which I think was interesting because I said this in the last script episode we did, but that in the script, um, Nancy and Steve are like, one person has an idea and then the others follow along. Whereas in the final version, they are much more of a team. They're leading this together, and they really played the chemistry those actors have and being like, okay, this is where we're going. This is what we want to call your attention to. And so once they started like, writing lines and filming this stuff, they're like, okay, we need to move with this because that's going to create a better scene.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because this scene, this scene, by the way, is where we learned that the Upside Down is stuck in 1983. But this scene and a scene that comes way after it, which is the Henry Krill's monologue, which we're definitely going to get to soon. I'm really excited about that. But both of those scenes are very different from the script to the screen. Like the dialogue and everything, for the most part, is different. And for this scene in particular, I actually like the on-screen version a lot better uh, than this one because the on-screen, really grabs you. It really grabs your attention of, hey, like we're not on the same timeline. Like it's really weird, that the worlds are parallel, but they're not moving um, together in terms of time and space. And but also another thing that I really noticed while um, Nancy and them were walking through the house and got to her room in this scene, and she's picking up everything, and I just noticed, how interesting it is that even though they're in the upside down, and this apparently it's been copied from the natural world, it's everything's still tangible as though they were in the right side up. And I find that very, very interesting, and I hope that is explained next season because, if it's just if this was from created from someone's uh, memory or whatever, how is it that everything's so tangible? I mean, that's um, it's very interesting to me. And to be honest with you, uh, when I first watched this scene, well, not really first watched it, but over time, I've kind of thought, what if the upside down is not actually stuck? What if this was just Vecna trapping Nancy because, you know, immediately after this he gets her, but then I'm like, I don't really know, because if that were the case they kind of would have told us that, but since the Duffers have said, yeah, we're gonna learn the answers to all that in season 5, I'm kind of throwing that theory to the wayside. But this is probably, other than the big Vecna reveal, this one was probably my favorite scene in this episode because it was definitely way out of left field. Like I did not see this one coming, and I was like, oh my gosh, another layer, another yet unexplained, unanswered question. But it's intriguing and it's interesting, and I loved it, and that's why we decided to have this scene be our last scene that we're going to talk about today on part 3, because we wanted to go out with a bang on this, because we've got a lot of other big stuff coming up, because we get the light bright scene after this, which is really amazing, but we're going to save that for next time. So, Jasmine, you have any final thoughts on this scene or any other scene that we've talked about today? And then after that, I will give my answer to today's essential question. Jasmine?
Alrighty. Yeah, I think again, this is the other big twist in the episode, and so I think that's why this scene probably had the most changes. You can tell, I think they changed a lot kind of the day of when they were doing this. I think partly because the lore, they wanted to get it right, but partly they wanted to kind of finalize what they were drawing our attention to. Like, things I noticed is that the order of what she points to in the room and what object she points out, some of them are the same, but some of them have changed. Again, there's they kind of fixed the timeline. Like in the script, she says, well, that she gave the stuffed animal to her cousin Joanna 2 years ago, the same time her and Steve broke up. But in the scene, she just says, I gave this, to cousin Joanna. The parts about the timeline where she picks up the diary, that's in the final version, but not in the script. I think they put that there to kind of explain it to the audience. I feel like they went to film this and they realized, oh, we're not giving the audience enough to go off of. So I'm really glad that they made changes to the scene. So for us as a viewer, we can understand where things are at. I think that was a good change. Also, I love that we got more Stancy content out of the updated scene. Also, they give us the exact date when the Upside Down froze, where the script doesn't. So we see the exact date in writing. We see Nancy talk about it. She talks about the timeline. You know, we kind of get a clearer picture as much as we can. And something a really good change that they made is that in the script, Nancy sees a photo of her and Steve and says she threw it out 3 years ago. One, that timeline is off. Two, when I read that line in the script, I'm like, I'm glad they cut that because that line makes no sense. Because even like, I mean, one thing if the breakup between her and Steve was this really acrimonious thing, but it wasn't. Like Steve was the kindest about it he could possibly be. Basically, gave her his blessing. You know what I mean? It wasn't an acrimonious split. Like, you know, they didn't hang out after that, but they stayed friends. So throwing out a photo is something you do in anger. Also, this is the 1980s. This is a time period, and younger people won't understand this, but this is a time period where, like, if you got rid of something, it was gone forever. There was no getting it back. Like, you couldn't just reprint the photo. Like, and from the photos we do see, it looks like a lot of those photos were like photo booth photos and stuff. So when I read that, I'm like, that makes absolutely no sense. They that she'd be like, I'm so mad about this completely, like, you know, amicable breakup. I'm gonna throw out this photo that I can never get back. That made no sense. And I feel like that must have come out when they were doing the rewrites the day of. And like to me, I'm like, you break up with somebody, and from my own experience, like, you know, you put that stuff away, you don't throw it out unless it was a really unless it was like a really acrimonious split. So I'm glad they changed it because that line didn't really make any sense. I think they were just kind of spitballing how they were going to show this, and I think the final version, like the final version makes more sense, and it connects kind of the freeze and Will and the gate and Stephen's relationship, and also like they're also trying to explain it to Eddie, and he's super confused. So I think that like Eddie kind of stands in for the audience there. And then getting to the end of the scene when they come back downstairs, Steve, I love the description in the script. It says, Steve looks like an angry man yelling at the sky or something when he's trying to like communicate with Dustin. I love that. And I also like, they clearly did this for comedy. And this must have been a direction. This was clearly a direction on the day of. Because in the script, like, they have like Steve looks like an angry man yelling at the sky or something, and then literally right after that, the following moment, everybody else can hear Dustin. But in the final version, Steve's yelling, and there's a beat in which all the other characters are looking at him and being like, "Did he really get rabies?" Like, because I can't hear anything, and then
Yeah.
it's a full beat, and then they hear him. So that was obviously put in for comedic value, and I thought that worked super well. Like that was hilarious, and you got to see like the concern. Like at first Nancy was like, what the heck are you doing, man? And then you could see where her and Robin started to get concerned. They went from like, dude, what are you doing, to being like, oh my god, does he actually have rabies? Like, oh my god. And then they hear Dustin and they're like, okay, it's not him, he's okay. And then again,
this is just what happened with Will when he was down here.
Yeah.
You know, there you go.
Yeah.
Let's go figure out how to communicate with him via the
Yeah.
lights, just like Joyce.
Yeah,
But that's
exactly.
a wholly different other scene, which we would definitely get to eventually.
Yes, absolutely. And my final thoughts on this are something I noticed is that Steve and Nancy are much more of a team when trying to get the lights to work. Like in the script, that's not the case. Everybody's trying to get the lights to work, whereas in the final version, Steve and Nancy are a team. Like they both realize what the other one is talking about, and they're like, okay, let's get these lights to work. Oh, try the switch, try this. Whereas Robin and Eddie are kind of standing back, which makes, again, I think they changed because it made more sense in the final version. Robin and Eddie don't have the experience that Nancy and Steve do, but they've seen how the lights work on the right side up. They both know. And so them being more of a team, I think made sense because you have two people who are coming from the same place of understanding. And then you have, they have a history. They were in a relationship. they've stayed friends. And then you have two people, one of whom has some experience, one of whom has none. It makes more sense for them to kind of hang back and kind of take Nancy and Steve's lead because they have more experience. They are a team. They are united. Robin is obviously like extremely stressed out and scared. Eddie is like doesn't know what the hell's going on. So I think in those kind of situations, you look to people who know more, or you look to that calm presence. And Nancy and Steve really provided that like joint leadership throughout their storyline throughout this season. So I thought that was a really great addition because it played off the actors' chemistry really well. And it makes, like, I think that group dynamic makes a lot more sense in the final version than the script version. The script version, I think it's giving Robin and Eddie, you know, like a comfortable, like a level of comfort that I don't think they would actually have. Oh, and this is something I just loved. So in the script, the shimmering lights is a lamp, but in the final version, it's a light fixture, which was a good call because that looks so much cooler. Like them reaching up to the light fixture of the dining room table, so much cooler than a random lamp on the table. Like so much cooler,
Mm-hmm.
100% cooler. Like that to me feels like they got on set and they were like, "Ooh, you know what we could do? This." Or maybe they tried it with a lamp and they were like, "Wow, that looks lame."
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, I will give my answer to the today's essential question, and then we'll get you guys out of here. So, if the what happened in episode 9 with the big reveal that Vecna formed what we know as the Mind Flayer, I would have been like, yeah, it's very possible that the Mind Flayer is controlling Vecna. He just doesn't, realize it yet. But considering that that scene isn't there, and apparently Henry Krill has had that within him since he was a child, drawing pictures that looked exactly like that figure when he was 12 years old in the attic of his home. Um, I think Vecna is definitely the one who formed uh, the spider monster, shadow monster, whatever you want to call him, mind flayer, and he is in control of it. I think that's why. I mean, I think that's what really connects him to the hive mind and everything, and why he is. I think it's helped him uh, be even more powerful because there's all sorts of energy within that cloud that we see when he formed uh, the mind flayer. But I also could see a Frankenstein situation here, in that the real monster was the doctor Frankenstein who created the monster that everyone thinks is Frankenstein, but it's really not. That's the doctor. So I'm not going to rewind. You'll just have to re-listen to this explanation for that. But yeah, that's my take on it. So I don't think that Dustin was incorrect, nor do I think he was correct, but I do think he was very much onto something. Obviously, we just didn't, get anything on screen of Eleven telling him and everybody else what Vecna told her about what happened once he uh, got down to the upside down after she bandaged him. So I think that will be something that they're going to save till next season for them all to come together and have discussions on this to fill everyone in. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us today. Jasmine and I, as always, had a blast talking about this, and hope stay tuned for next time because we're definitely going to get to the light bright scene and all the as much as we can until we get to probably what everyone really enjoys about this episode is the big reveal that Vecna is Henry is one. So with that, this is Ashley and Jasmine saying thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you guys next time. And over and out.
Over and out.